wonderful to have a new admiral in the Texas Navy, and we welcome Congressman Hudson to that role, that honorary role in the Texas Navy, and are grateful to Judge Carter for his role in making that happen, and to our great Governor Greg Abbott. Thank you both. So it's nice to be able to do something that brings a smile. But I think, you know, for Texans to ask that people remember the Alamo harkens back feelings within us that freedom and liberty is something worth dying for. That's what all of those Texans did. And with due deference to my friend from Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, yes, I know we're grateful for Tennessee for their contribution at the Alamo and to Texas as well. But those people had a choice. Were they going to run, or were they going to stand for freedom? Stand against despotism. And they chose to stand. And here it is 163 years later, and we still remember, and we're still inspired. Liberty comes at great cost, and we're forever grateful to our God and to our predecessors that took such a stand against tyranny. There's a lot of tyranny going on in the Middle East, and there will be till the end of time. But each of us have a responsibility to do what we can to help accommodate and protect those that can't help themselves. That's why some of us are pro-life. But when it comes to life in the Middle East, it's been shocking now for years. Under the previous administration, the people that were supported, the weapons that were provided to what people that were called the vetted moderate rebels against the leader of Syria. And yet we saw over and over again those so-called vetted moderate rebels were constantly allowing their weapons to be seized. Some question whether they were actually turned over, but to radical Islamists who hate Americans, who made clear, yeah, they're not crazy about some fellow Muslims, but they like them a whole lot better than they do the United States and Christians. So it was tragic in years prior when our current UN General Secretary was in charge of the refugee program at the UN, and people were noticing under then the head of the refugee program of the UN, now General Secretary, they were noticing that, gee, you're helping all these Muslims, which is wonderful, but there is a significant percentage in those areas, some areas there that being overrun by ISIS, where there are Christians, and the Christians appear to be the target of a genocide. And it's been a long time since I read his quote, but in essence, it was basically, well, you know, those Christians are very important to those areas historically where they are, and so we think it's important to just let them stay in those areas. Well, what Christians had found was if they tried to go to the refugee camps where they were unwelcome and brutalized, they're lucky if they got out with their lives, but they weren't welcome. And the head of the refugee program did nothing that we can find to accommodate Christians to the extent that he was accommodating Muslims. I don't know if it was an innate bias, prejudice, bigotry that he had, maybe still has, or whether it was just sheer ignorance on his part, deciding to save some people and not save a big bulk of the Christians. So they were being wiped out. There's a genocide going on. And I saw this story today by Edwin Morrow, and the title of the article is, "Hope is Back. Trump helped save Christians, Yazidis in Iraq from extinction." It goes on to say U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is helping bring Christians and Yazidis in Iraq back from the brink of extinction, fomented by a genocidal campaign at the hands of the Islamic State. Religious minority representatives declared this week at the second ministerial to advance religious freedom convened by the Department of State. The U.S. government has officially determined that ISIS committed genocide against Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities during its reign of terror in the Middle East that began in 2014. Of course, that was when the Obama administration was in its heyday. Of course, we didn't realize how much the DOJ, FBI, some of the intel community had been weaponized and actually corrupted. But the article goes on, echoing Yazidis activists and U.S.-based Syriac Catholic Iraqi priest who spoke to Breitbart News, a Chaldean Catholic priest from a parish in Christian Iraqi town, indicated that hope for the future, along with security improvements, have returned to religious minority communities devastated by ISIS, courtesy of the Trump administration efforts. Their comments came during the three-day ministerial summit. While delivering a speech during the event on Wednesday, Father Thabit Habib Yosef, a Chaldean Catholic priest from the town of Karamlis in Iraq's Nineveh province, thanked the Trump administration for its assistance. And this is what Father Yosef had to say. I wish to give thanks to the government of the United States for including us in this important conference, and a special thanks to the administration of President Trump for his concern and commitment to the persecuted minority communities in Iraq. I can say this conference gives us hope. Our greatest fear in the early years was that the world would forget us. This conference tells us we're not forgotten. Nearly half of the Christian families who fled Karamlis, liberated by U.S. and local forces in November 2016, have returned. Father Thabit expects many more to come back in the coming year. Although ISIS burned down the homes and churches in the Christian town, we're determined to return and rebuild. Today, we have 45% of our families returned, and we hope in this next year we will see many more. He went on to say that the Iraqi government needs to do more to bring about real change and support for the protection, safety, and equal rights for the minority communities in Iraq. The U.S.-funded nation-building efforts, coupled with, and let me make clear on that, talking about helping others build their nations. For those who claim that America is trying to build some hegemony, has imperialistic notions, as it always has, it just tells us they had terrible history teachers. They're not intentionally spreading untruths. They're just ignorant. They don't know what the real truth is. Because the real truth is, we've never been an imperialistic nation. If we had been, then English would be all that was spoken in France and Germany and Japan, many other nations. That's not who we are. It's not who we've been. We have given our most precious commodity, American lives, for other people's freedom. Back to this article, it says the U.S. funded efforts coupled with assistance from the Catholic group Knights of Columbus, the government of Hungary, have rendered the town of Karamlis a story of success, and we are optimistic it will survive, Father Thabet also said. Northern Iraq's Nineveh province is the historical homeland of Iraqi Christians and home to the largest concentration of religious minorities in the country. So it goes on and also talks about the help this has been to Yazidis. And I note this week we had resolutions or amendments to condemn and express the majority of the House's sentiment that we shouldn't do anything to help in the effort against those who are killing, persecuting, and trying to commit a genocide against the Yazidis in Yemen. But thankfully, that's only from the majority in the House. That's really unfortunate. But you know, there's also been news this week. We may have a very strong anti-Israeli resolution filed. Why not? The majority doesn't ever condemn specific anti-Semitism by members here in the House, so why not file a resolution? We'll see if it gets filed, that's the news, that supports the boycott against Israel, even though the people it supports, that resolution would support, would be the very people that have said they want Israel wiped off the map. They want no Israel from the river to the sea. They want it gone. They want a genocide. They want the Jews wiped out. And that's a goal. It was a goal of Arafat. It's why when Ehud Barak, as Prime Minister of Israel, when President Clinton was twisting his arm so strongly, basically offered Arafat virtually everything he wanted. I personally, knowing biblical history, I think you had a case where, just as God hardened the heart of Pharaoh initially when Moses was asking to let his people go, I think Arafat's heart was hardened. He got basically everything he wanted, but he turned it all down. If he had accepted it, it would have been basically impossible for Israel to defend itself under anything but nuclear means. No conventional way to defend Israel if Arafat had accepted that, what I would consider outrageous proposal. But fortunately, he didn't accept it, and so Israel's been able to defend itself since then. But the attacks are daily. They're ongoing. It is an ongoing effort by enemies of Israel that are being promoted by some Democrats, some in Congress, some outside of Congress. That's who they're supporting. People that are every single day smuggling rockets into Gaza, smuggling weapons, trying to smuggle weapons into Israel, and continuing to teach hatred, blind bigotry against the Jewish people, against Israel. So I would be thrilled if that resolution did not get filed, but that's up to individuals in Congress. Everybody has a right to file whatever bill they think will be most helpful. But, you know, I've looked for scripture in the Bible that says those who curse or seek to harm Israel will be blessed, and it's just not there. So it causes me grave concern to think that we may have people in leadership positions in the United States again who really want to harm Israel. They want to divide it. I know we have a growing group that don't believe anything in the Bible, but for those of us who do, when we're told that any nation that divides or attempts to divide Israel will bring down judgment on itself. That causes me great concern for the country for which I've taken an oath to defend repeatedly. As a member of the United States Army, as an assistant district attorney, as a district judge, as a chief justice, and as a member of Congress. And that oath means so much to me that I think it would be a good idea to be supportive of the nation of Israel. And I'm thrilled we have a president that is doing that. Even though reports I've heard from people that were there, he had cabinet officials telling him he was going to start World War III if he recognized Jerusalem as the capital. And a bit like some of the stories of Lincoln being told by every member of the cabinet it would be a disaster if he finalized the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln knew it was right in his heart, and with every cabinet member reportedly against him and arguing against it, in essence said, yeah, the ayes have it. He was the only one. Here you have not all, but most of the cabinet really hammering President Trump not to recognize Jerusalem as the capital. He knew in his heart it was the right thing to do. He'd said he would do it. He did it. I know some can't find anything at all admirable about President Trump. They're so blinded by their hatred, but I think that's a pretty amazing thing that President Trump has done. And now to hear from Christians in the Middle East who were the objects of genocide, being wiped out, being killed, destroyed, taken off of the map completely without much of anything helpful from the so-called United Nations. That's amazing what President Trump has done in that regard. So when I hear friends across the aisle saying we've lost respect around the world, they're not seeing and hearing what I am. The last polls I saw were that around the world there is more respect for our president than prior administration. And the truth is, in respect, there is a little element of fear. You can not like somebody, but still respect them. And fear can be involved. We have a reputation that is growing again, that I have a president that will do what he said. Sometimes he's talked out of taking steps like bombing and killing 100 or more in Iran. But what we're seeing in Iran is amazing because their economy is suffering dramatically, so much you see them lashing out and trying to, whether it's attacking ships, trying to use whatever power they can. The pressure is intensifying, and I would humbly submit this will not be a president who, in response to the biggest supporter of terrorism in world history, sends them pallets full of billions and billions of dollars in cash to help the biggest supporter of terrorism, who has been responsible for the deaths of more American military than anybody else in recent decades. So they can say what they want about our president. He's doing amazing work. And it's interesting, I keep hearing this term racist. And the president keeps talking about American citizens. Well, until recent days, it's never been racist to talk about American citizens. And in fact, going back again to the comment of Benjamin Franklin after the Constitutional Convention, it's a republic, madam, if you can keep it. He knew that republics, the very few that have been established, that just means they elect representatives. It's not the totally democratic governing that was, for example, in Athens as a city-state. They had a democracy, and what historians have seen very clearly is when it's a true democracy where everybody participates. Heck, they had jurors. They'd have 501 jurors in just a court case. And what that would often lead to would be mob action. I mean, people get stirred up and they end up coming out with a sentence like they did for Socrates that was far beyond anything appropriate whatsoever. You take an innocent man like that and have him put to death simply because you had too many jurors that got each other worked up. So that is where Rome made a great stride forward. He said, you know what? There were problems. It was a good idea, but there were problems with a complete democracy where everybody participates in all governing decisions except jurors, and that's up 501. But Rome figured out we need a representative form of government. So it has parts of it that are democracies, and then part it's a representative government, so it's a republic. And until Caesar crossed the Rubicon and made it into a virtual dictatorship, of course, that didn't last long, because as Mark Antony said, Brutus says he's ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. So are they all honorable men. There was trouble in the Roman Empire, but they began to have a flood of people that were not Roman citizens. They lost their power. They had begun bread and circuses, gave away way too much in what was considered welfare of that day, bread and circuses. And as I recall, there was even a Caesar that decided maybe we're corrupting people by providing this form of welfare and entertainment. But by that point, it was too late to rein it in. And for all of these factors and others coming into play, people crossing their borders and taking their toll, the Roman Empire was eventually lost. No country is going to last forever. I love this country. I have offered to die for this country. That's what you do when you sign up and take an oath in the U.S. military. But when people begin not to appreciate the good things that their nation does and is doing, has done, and they build up hatred toward their own nation, you really are on the downhill slide, and you're moving ever closer to the dustbin of history. Eventually, every country is going to get there. But our goal in this body should be to perpetuate this little experiment in self-government, the best ever contrived. Keep it going as long as possible. Don't let it die on our watch. But it's in trouble. And as we have bills, I don't know anybody on this entire House floor, either party, who is against standing behind helping those incredible American heroes of 9/11 and the days following. We're all for that. But then we have people in the majority that see an opportunity. Let's run, instead of doing what we normally do and have an authorization for 5 years and 5 years, extend 10 years. We had a bill that was extended to 2092. There will not be a firefighter or policeman who is alive anywhere close to 2092. A first responder that was there during 9/11 and doing these heroic works. So why would they choose 2092? Well, the saying in Washington is, no matter how cynical you get, it's never enough to catch up. But you go by what we've seen, people in this body often, and it's happened on both sides of the aisle, they like to get a bill, especially with money, get it extended out as far as possible, way beyond the existence of people for whom it's dedicated. And then when those people eventually pass away, you will see an effort come in here and say, wow, we had all this money that we've passed overwhelmingly, and now the people aren't there that it was originally meant for. So let's start giving this money to other people, people that we want to curry favor with, and that's not the way it's supposed to go. I voted for it out of respect for our heroes, but for goodness sake, 2092, seriously? How could anybody with a straight face say, oh, if you're not for paying out billions and billions of dollars in 2091 to 2092, then you must hate the first responders of 9/11. That's ridiculous. They have inspired me from that time. And I in my hometown in East Texas and in our towns all over East Texas saw the same thing. People lined up to give blood. First time I went, they said there's hours and hours of wait to give blood for people in New York. So we would ask that you come back tomorrow. You couldn't even get in. That was true all over East Texas and all over the country. People cared deeply about what they had seen happen. We were under attack from outside. There were no hyphenated Americans. We were all just Americans wanting to help each other and help those that have been harmed. So I hope that the Senate will take a look at that and be able to be more responsible so that the 9/11 fund will truly be for the people that the 9/11 fund says it's supposed to be for. I mean, we're loading up future generations with so much debt. That alone could be enough to bring down our country. It's time to become responsible. And I know across the aisle, we've had these hearings on the bills, the Equality Act, for example, and I understand the sentiment behind it is to try to avoid any type of discomfort, uncomfortable feelings by anybody because of their chosen gender. But as we brought out at our hearings before the Equality Act was passed in committee and here on the floor, there is a danger, and it's not about making people a little uncomfortable because they're biologically male, but they want to go to a women's restroom. Because as a former felony judge, I've heard the testimony about the trauma. I've seen the effects of sexual assault on women. I have read and understand that women who are victims of sexual assault have 3 to 4 times more occurrence of PTSD. And different explanations as why that is. They have so much higher rate of PTSD than even our soldiers in combat. But also that a trigger for reliving the horrors, the awful crime against them and their person is to be in a small confined area and have someone of the opposite sex come in And we were laughed at, belittled when we brought up that concern. And this story was contained in another story. It was about a British leader who was pushing for transgender bathrooms. It's now under criminal investigation or charges. But this was a story I missed back in February that a trans woman, meaning biological man, but considered himself, herself, whatever you want to say, to be a woman, was allowed to walk free from the Sheriff Court in Scotland after being convicted of sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl in a supermarket restroom. The attacker, whose name is given as Katie Dolotowski, waited for the young victim to come out of a toilet cubicle at Morrison's supermarket, then grabbed her by the face, forced her back inside. Dolotowski told the girl to remove her trousers and warned that a man outside would kill her mother, but she fought back, striking the pedophile in the face, belly, crotch, tearing away to her father and siblings outside. Dolotowski had attempted to photograph a 12-year-old as she urinated at another supermarket a month prior, but Judge James Williamson decided not to send the sex offender to prison, instead handing down a tagging order and community service order. Girl's mother was horrified, saying she felt very let down. She did not have any confidence whatsoever that Dolotowski would not go out and do something equally as bad or worse. And it is important to still discuss this because the Senate hadn't taken it up, and I hope they won't take it up because of the problems, this so-called misnamed Equality Act. It's not equality for female sexual assault victims, that's for sure. But then it contained another reference to Girl Guides. It's like Girl Scouts. Expels leaders who oppose trans shower sharing policies. And this insert says 2 Girls Guide leaders were expelled after they opposed new rules which compel units to let transgender identifying males share showers and other facilities with girls as young as 5. There are other references like allegedly transgender prisoner gets life after raping 2 women, sexually assaulting inmates in the female jail. Another mother arrested in front of her children for calling a trans activist a man, said Kate Skottal was arrested for calling a trans activist man online, and a judge has banned her from referencing their former male identity. So there was a time when people could say hurtful things in America, but as we see with any declining society, not declining in goods and services, but declining in morality, and as a society, we see it in LA, the most so-called liberated and liberal leaders of cities in America seem to have more homelessness, more defecation on the streets, more pollution. Where are all the green activists, by the way? I mean, these people are polluting like crazy, and, you know, they're out there with signs picketing everywhere else, but for some reason, they don't seem to be bothered by the destruction of an orderly society. You go back to some of the great city states, one of their big problems was sewage. And if you have too much homelessness, you encourage it, bless it, then it can cause problems for any society. But that also brings us to our southern border. The continued expressions from this body about wanting to get rid of any enforcement of our border, and refusing in the $4.6 billion that was passed out of this House, not one dime for detention beds, not one dime to help the Border Patrol do their job to secure the border, not one dime to help build wall barrier where we need it. when we basically, because of liberals who may mean well, but they're basically turned over our southern border to drug cartels. Some of the most evil people in the world, these drug cartels. And we're not going to enforce our border. That message from the majority has gone out over and over again. And what it does, as the Border Patrol will tell you, if you go down there as often as I have, every time one of you guys in Congress talk about amnesty, legalization, not enforcing the border, any of those things, we get surges. And they'll also tell you, and I've seen it for myself, the drug cartels control everybody when and where they cross the border. And they will send groups, and the Border Patrol know when they send a group in the middle of the night, they have to stand there and go through in processing all these people, asking them their questions. And despite what some of our colleagues across the aisle have said, these are sympathetic Border Patrolmen. I've seen it over and over. Seen hundreds of very sympathetic Border Patrolmen. But they are at their wits' end. An article here from Michaela Ross today talking about sick, exhausted border agents stoke exodus fear in migrant surge. The migrants, the illegal aliens coming in, and I've been castigated for referring to them as aliens like they're from some other planet, and I had to remind my colleagues the very bill that they were supporting referred to them as aliens. And they were a little embarrassed because they didn't realize they referred to them as aliens. They thought it was just mean-spirited Republicans. It's kind of interesting when you see that kind of thing. But it is a tragedy, and it's a humanitarian crisis on our southern border. And it's no longer just a humanitarian crisis for those who are pouring over our border illegally. They're taking their toll on the Border Patrolmen. And some have suspected that, gee, maybe that's a strategy of the Democratic Party. You keep talking about amnesty, about getting rid of border enforcement, which will encourage more and more people to come in. You keep claiming that people, no matter whether they came in illegally or legally, should be allowed to vote, and keep encouraging people in. You refuse to give a dime for border enforcement. You refuse to give a dime for beds to house people that are pouring in illegally, for what they need to be able to detain people that have committed criminal acts and coming into the country. You continue to talk about doing away with any criminality to violating the law, and more people come in. You devastate those officers who have taken an oath to defend our border and our Constitution, and they're already having recruiting problems. Why would somebody want to come work where you've got the major party in a major party of the two in the country that castigates you at every turn, says you can't and or won't protect babies, children? You don't care, you're mean, you're evil, when you're out there doing everything you can and you're being harassed, not being given what you need. And then we had this bill this week in Judiciary talking about it was going to add millions and millions and millions of dollars of requirements for the Border Patrol to have to follow, lest they be pursued with some kind of charge or allegation, and yet not give them a dime to do those jobs, knowing that the result will be more and more people flooding in, more and more humanitarian crisis. Then you blame the humanitarian crisis on those that are trying to secure our nation, and then you get allowance for all of those people that have poured in illegally, that many of them don't speak English. They don't know what's going on. They've never been educated on how you sustain a self-governing country. And all I can figure, the assessment has to have been made, yes, it will have our country in chaos for a little while, and we'll have to take away some freedoms because of all the chaos. But that will, as Democrats have said, that will end the Republican Party nationally, as the Democrats were able to do in California with 2 or 3 million pouring in and voting that had come in illegally after the amnesty in '86. Actually, after '86, when they were given amnesty, now it's legal for them to vote, and that changed California into a very democratic state. And there is an assessment that we can do that for the nation and eliminate the Republican Party as having any kind of viability. And then once we do that, even though it's taken quite a toll on the country, we'll get control back again. We'll rein in the chaos, and the Republicans will be gone, and we'll be a one-party country. Somebody must have made that kind of assessment to be pushing the kind of bills that they are. We cannot allow that chaos to occur and to build, because as historians, it wasn't just Ronald Reagan, historians throughout time have noted, once you have a country that has had great freedom and it loses that freedom, it doesn't come back. Reagan said, not in that generation. But I have trouble finding where it ever came back once a nation with freedom lost it. And that's a real potential if we don't get things under control. I think God has blessed this country more than any country. I know Solomon's Israel was just an absolutely amazing place, but there's no place that's ever had our opportunities, our individual freedoms, our individual assets, never in history of the world. And there's nothing wrong with recognizing the greatness that America has been. It's only in recognizing America's greatness that you can determine we want to perpetuate that for future generations to have those opportunities, those freedoms, those assets. But we're in trouble, and there's got to be a change, or our time as the greatest country in history will become a self-fulfilling prophecy of those who say, it was never that great. Nah, it was not a great country. No, I've always been embarrassed about America. That will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We will lose our greatness. We will lose our freedom. And having said to 3 individuals from Australia that were here on Capitol Hill a couple of years ago, hey, I've had people up here say, when we lose our freedom, we guess we can all come to Australia. And neither of them even laughed. And one of them said, do you not understand? If you lose your freedom in America, China will take over Australia before you could ever get there. America is a shining light on a hill. We give people hope. I've heard it and seen it from Africans with tears in their eyes. And yeah, they were Christians. Maybe you be prejudiced against them, but they said we need America strong if we're going to have any chance of security and freedom in our own country. Let's keep America strong. Let's support Israel. Let's support enforcing the law as it is, as it has been, and as we need it to prolong and perpetuate this incredible country. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.